What if the real struggle in Ukraine is not only about land, but about who will dictate the laws of future warfare? Today, Russian forces are not just attacking, they are expanding the conflict's boundaries with an unexpected ferocity, testing the limits of what modern war can mean. The front lines, once thought static and predictable, are now shifting at a pace and scale few dared to imagine even a month ago. This is not merely a battle for territory, but for the power to shape the future of conflict itself. Consider the events unfolding near Pokrovsk. Russian encirclements are closing in with deadly precision, much like the German pincers at Stalingrad during the Second World War, but with the added lethality of drones and precision artillery. Ukrainian supply routes, once lifelines for defenders, are now shattered by relentless fire, leaving isolated garrisons to hold out against impossible odds. What was once a distant threat has now become a suffocating siege, forcing withdrawals from positions that just weeks ago were considered impregnable. The echoes of encirclements past, from the First World War trenches to the Korean War's chosen reservoir, remind us how quickly advantage can shift when supply lines are lost. Both Russian and Ukrainian sources, from frontline commanders to impartial analysts, paint a grim picture. Ukraine's elite reserves are being ground down. These are not ordinary troops, but the most skilled and tenacious fighters the country can field, now depleted and exhausted in brutal combats. The loss of these units is not just a tactical setback, but a strategic wound that may take years, or even decades, to heal. In the First World War, the loss of elite shock troops often presaged collapse, as happened with the French and German armies following years of attrition. Western experts, who once predicted Russian advances would stall or falter, are now scrambling to explain these reversals. Their old certainties have collapsed as new realities redraw the map. Each shift in territory brings with it a seismic change in the balance of battlefield power, reminiscent of the sudden German breakthrough at Sedan in 1940, which upended all Allied assumptions and forced a hasty, costly reappraisal. Ignore what is happening now, and you risk missing how close the world stands to a far larger crisis. With every day of fighting, the chances increase that this conflict will spill beyond Ukraine's borders, reshaping not just one region, but the very rules that underlie global security. The situation mirrors moments in history where local wars, like those in the Balkans before the First World War, spiraled into global conflagration due to miscalculation and entangled alliances. To truly understand the stakes, we must chart the evolving situation. Who controls which territories, where pressure is building most intensely, and why these developments threaten to upend the international order. This is not just a war of movement, but a contest for the soul of international norms, where every block captured or lost could signal a new era in world politics. The following updates will trace the most critical movements on the ground and uncover how each shift could trigger broader consequences. Only by mapping these changes can we grasp the world-altering risks now in play. This is not hyperbole. History is replete with examples where small local collapses set off avalanches that engulfed continents. Every morning, the map of war is redrawn. But the true story lies in the shifting shadows, details that speak to deeper, graver changes beneath the surface. It is the subtle, often overlooked changes, the loss of a bridge, the destruction of a railway, the encirclement of a garrison, that herald the coming storm. Across the southern and eastern reaches of Ukraine, Russian offensives have gathered startling momentum. In districts such as Kherson, Pokrovsk, Krasnoarmeysk, and Mirnograd, Moscow's troops are not simply attacking. They are systematically carving out new salients, redrafting the battle map one block at a time. Urban neighborhoods once considered safe havens now echo with artillery, as Russian advances force Ukrainian defenders to abandon towns and even entire sectors. The fall of strongpoints like Novopavlovka and the storming of western Krasnoarmeysk are not isolated events. They are part of a deliberate, grinding strategy to wear down Ukrainian defenders and open the way to deeper penetration. Nowhere is the pressure more acute than on the Pokrovsk front. Ukrainian units find themselves compressed into a tightening pocket, their supply lines fraying with each passing hour. Only a single road to Pavlograd remains, and it is a gauntlet, swept by Russian artillery and drones. Getting ammunition, food, or reinforcements through has become a deadly gamble. Each failed delivery further saps Ukraine's ability to hold, let alone counterattack. This scenario evokes historical sieges, such as the encirclement of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, where resupply was a matter of life or death. The toll is mounting in human terms, too. The count of Ukrainian prisoners has spiked, with entire detachments surrendering as their positions become indefensible. Independent analysts suggest this is not a mere blip, but a surge, one that erodes morale and stirs uncertainty among both ordinary soldiers and their commanders. A sense of vulnerability hangs over the trenches. Stories emerge of soldiers who, after weeks without rotation or meaningful resupply, are forced into the harrowing choice between surrender and certain destruction. Why is this happening now? Russian forces have shifted to localized, flexible tactics. Small mobile groups probing for weak points, sudden flanking moves to disrupt command, and relentless strikes on supply lines. By targeting infrastructure, bridges, roads, and even power grids, Moscow is making it nearly impossible for Kiev to reinforce threatened sectors or regroup battered units. Rather than massive frontal assaults, these are methodical, cumulative blows designed to break resistance piece by piece. This approach resembles the German stormtrooper tactics of 1918, updated with 21st-century technology, drones, satellite-guided artillery, and real-time electronic warfare. The wider world, meanwhile, is playing catch-up. Just weeks ago, Western analysts predicted Russian setbacks, expecting Ukrainian counterattacks to reclaim ground. Instead, Russian salients are not just surviving, but expanding, with fresh troops and equipment reinforcing every gain. The battle lines are shifting with a speed and scale few outside observers anticipated. In places like the Zaporizhia sector, Russian units are now forming semicircular encirclements around Ukrainian garrisons, threatening to repeat the pattern of isolation and collapse seen elsewhere. Ignore these shifts, and you risk missing how quickly the conflict's tempo is changing. What looks like a small encroachment today could, tomorrow, trigger a larger collapse, one with consequences that ripple far beyond the Donbass or Dnipro. The domino effect is not just theoretical. It has precedent in numerous conflicts, where a breakthrough in one area led to rapid cascading retreats elsewhere. But while the front lines are tilting, another battle is playing out off the field, one shaped not by bullets, but by high-stakes decisions in Washington and Moscow. The decisions being made now, in air-conditioned conference rooms far from the mud and blood of the front, may soon decide the fate of millions. What does it look like when a defense weakens, not just from enemy fire, but from within? Across Ukraine, cracks are spreading, some visible on the front, others hidden in command rooms. These internal fractures have become as threatening as any Russian offensive. When units are overextended, supply is unreliable, and morale falters, the entire defensive system can unravel with terrifying speed. General Syrsky's strategy is to concentrate Ukraine's elite units at key flashpoints, hoping to hold back the Russian tide. But this comes at a price. Long stretches of the front are now thinly manned, left vulnerable to sudden, focused assaults. Russian troops exploit these gaps, sending small, agile groups to probe, then quickly punch through weakened lines. This is a classic dilemma, seen in wars from Napoleon's campaigns to the Israeli experience in the Yom Kippur War. Concentrate your best troops and risk exposing your flanks, or spread them thin and risk being overrun everywhere. For many Ukrainian soldiers, the ground truth is grim. Isolated outposts see dwindling supplies and late reinforcements. Official statements promise resilience and rotation, but the reality is far starker. Men holding ground with little support, ammunition running low, and some units facing the impossible choice between surrender or annihilation. Whispers of chaos and insubordination grow louder as frontline experiences drift farther from the confident words spoken in Kiev. In some sectors, reports emerge of soldiers refusing orders to counterattack without adequate artillery cover, echoing the mutinies that plagued exhausted armies in past wars. Russian advances are sharpened by relentless precision. Artillery, and above all, drones hammer Ukrainian supply routes. Convoys are ambushed. Bridges and power lines are knocked out in rear areas, amplifying confusion and making every resupply run a gamble. Each destroyed truck, every hit depot, chips away at Ukraine's ability to fight, and morale with it. The increasing use of loitering munitions, or so-called kamikaze drones, represents a new chapter in the evolution of asymmetrical warfare, giving numerically inferior forces the power to disrupt entire sectors. Western analysts once predicted a bloody stalemate. Now, the surge in Ukrainian prisoners and the clear breakdown in command are impossible to ignore. If this unraveling continues, collapse might not creep but crash, changing the war overnight and forcing Western capitals to rethink every calculation. This is the nightmare scenario for any alliance, that the front will not bend but shatter, sending shockwaves through political establishments from Berlin to Washington. But as military pressure mounts, another contest is unfolding on the global stage, one that could redraw borders, alliances, and the rules by which the world operates. In times past, such as during the Crimean War of the 19th century or the Balkan crises of the early 20th, local defeats often led to systemic international upheavals. As the front lines fracture, the world's great powers maneuver behind the scenes, each decision sending new ripples through an already unstable landscape. Economic sanctions, intelligence leaks, and diplomatic pressure are combined in a complex game of chess, where one wrong move could mean checkmate for global stability. Could the brutal fight for Ukraine ignite a chain reaction leading to a global, perhaps even nuclear showdown? The question may sound alarmist, but history urges caution. The world has come to the brink before, most famously during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the placement of nuclear weapons in Cuba brought the United States and Soviet Union to the edge of annihilation. Recently leaked intelligence reveals that the United States is preparing to send Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. These missiles are not ordinary weapons. Their impressive range and pinpoint accuracy could strike far inside Russian-held territory. With this move, the line between indirect support and direct American involvement blurs, and the scenario of open U.S. participation shifts from hypothetical to immediate. The shipment of ATACMS missiles earlier in the conflict set a precedent for escalation, but the Tomahawk represents a new threshold. Moscow has not stayed quiet. Russian leaders have issued sharp warnings that transferring such advanced weaponry would be seen as active United States entry into the war. In response, the Kremlin has moved fast and deliberately, announcing new defense alliances with countries such as Venezuela, right on America's doorstep. This mirrors Cold War patterns, where proxy conflicts in far-off lands became the grounds for great power confrontation. Signals now suggest that Russia is ready to deploy advanced weapons systems in the Western Hemisphere. The echoes of the Cold War are unmistakable. International experts, including Chinese strategists, are openly raising alarms about a Caribbean Crisis 2.0. The haunting memory of the missile standoff that once brought the world to the edge of nuclear disaster is suddenly fresh again. The possibility of Russian missiles within striking distance of major U.S. cities is no longer a relic of history, but an urgent topic of debate. Think of how the world held its breath in October 1962, waiting to see if human civilization would survive the week. This is escalation at work. As both powers introduce increasingly powerful arms, the danger of a fatal miscalculation grows. Each new step by one side prompts a counter-move by the other, pulling more nations and advanced weaponry into the fray. The progression from a regional proxy war to a direct and potentially uncontrollable Russia-NATO clash now seems disturbingly short. The lessons of the First World War's July crisis are clear. A series of decisions, each seemingly rational, can combine to unleash forces no one can control. One miscalculation, a single wrong decision, could unleash a spiral of retaliation. The cost would be catastrophic, endangering global security, financial systems, and the lives of millions. Energy supplies, economic stability, and the very fabric of daily life could be shattered. The world stands closer now than it has in generations to a conflict whose consequences defy calculation. Modern life, dependent on stable energy flows, global supply chains, and digital infrastructure, could unravel in days. But as world leaders trade threats and warnings, ordinary people in cities far from the front lines are left wondering, how close is the danger really? The answer may depend on decisions made in the coming days. In the summer of 1914, few believed that the assassination of an archduke would lead to world war. Yet, within weeks, the entire continent was at war. In a world where headlines sprint ahead of the facts, how can you spot the true story before it arrives at your doorstep? The answer lies in vigilance, skepticism, and historical awareness. Begin by treating official optimism with suspicion. Reassuring speeches and confident press releases often gloss over the messier realities. Governments and experts sometimes downplay disasters or inflate minor victories, leaving you with an illusion instead of clarity. The infamous Peace for Our Time speech before the Second World War reminds us how official reassurances can mask impending disaster. Next, do not underestimate gradual or incremental gains. Small advances on the battlefield, just a few meters here, a bridgehead there, can quietly alter the bigger picture. When a single supply line is severed or exhausted units are forced back, momentum can shift with surprising speed and impact. The collapse of the French army in 1940 was not the result of one decisive blow, but of a series of accumulating setbacks that suddenly became unstoppable. Also, stay alert to mirrored responses. In every major escalation, one side's gambit is usually echoed by the other, sometimes not in the same arena, but in new spheres like cyber attacks, diplomatic moves, or economic retaliation. These tit-for-tat maneuvers can escalate tensions beyond the original battlefield, with unpredictable outcomes. The cyber attacks on Estonian infrastructure in 2007 illustrated how conflicts can spill into new domains with far-reaching consequences. Remember, global conflicts rarely erupt from a single dramatic explosion. Instead, they build through months of pressure, stumbles, and overlooked warnings. What seems like a sudden crisis is often the result of ignored signals piling up until the world cannot look away. The outbreak of the Korean War in 1950 was preceded by years of small clashes that most observers ignored, until it was too late. Above all, make skepticism your habit. Challenge the dominant narrative, seek out independent reporting, and stay flexible as new facts emerge. Missing the early warning signs does not just leave you in the dark. It can undermine your country's readiness for shocks to security, energy, or the stability that shapes your daily life. The COVID-19 pandemic showed the consequences of underestimating early warnings. The lesson applies just as much to war. With Russian advances accelerating and superpower tensions mounting, the margin for error is narrowing fast. The next moves, military or political, could redraw the boundaries of the conflict and reshape the world order. The Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved in 13 tense days, but only by the narrowest margin. Today, the tools of escalation are more numerous, and the room for error smaller. What you focus on today could determine how you survive tomorrow. Being informed, vigilant, and adaptable is not paranoia, it is prudence. Across Ukraine, events are accelerating with a weight and speed that few imagined. Russian forces are pressing forward on multiple key fronts, probing for gaps and relentlessly exploiting every Ukrainian vulnerability. Each small territorial gain, once dismissed as minor, now carries the power to reshape not only the battlefield, but the entire global order. The world has seen before how the loss of a single city or the severing of a single railway can set off a cascade of events with world-changing consequences. Western experts, who once predicted a deadlock or even a Ukrainian resurgence, are being forced to recalibrate their outlooks. The truth is that these tactical advances are piling up, and with every village, bridge, or supply line that falls, consequences ripple far beyond the immediate war zone. the notion that distant conflicts can be neatly contained is rapidly eroding. The wars of Yugoslav succession in the 1990s began as local disputes, but soon destabilized the entire region and drew in outside powers. At the same time, the diplomatic stakes are rising in parallel. The United States and Russia are engaged in a tense game of signals, sanctions, and strategic posturing. The danger extends beyond the front lines. A single misstep could trigger a chain of geopolitical events, sweeping in new nations, destabilizing markets, and sending shocks through global energy systems. None of this is happening in isolation. These threads are tightly woven together, and their impact could soon reach every corner of the world, no matter how far you are from the fighting. The cost of inattention is climbing, with no one shielded from the consequences. The fabric of global security, the steadiness of economies, even the flow of daily routines, all hang in the balance. To assume that tomorrow's news will mirror yesterday's is a risky illusion, especially in an era when upheaval is almost a constant, and the ground beneath us seems to shift with every passing hour. This is the time to question easy narratives, scrutinize what you take for granted, and stay vigilant as events unfold at breakneck speed. In a world where sudden offensives and diplomatic gambits can redraw the future overnight, readiness is not a luxury. It is a necessity. Take practical steps now. Diversify your sources of information, follow independent analysts, and study the history of past crises for lessons that remain relevant. Consider your own preparedness, financial, informational, and psychological, for shocks that could upend the familiar patterns of life. The question debt has been closed. What happens next will depend on choices made by leaders and by ordinary people alike. The future is not predetermined, but the warning is clear. In a world where the laws of war are being rewritten in real time, only those who remain alert, informed, and adaptable will be able to navigate the storms ahead.